Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I'm excited to have back on Destiny Rezendes, investigative journalist, reporter, to talk about a lot of stuff that's going on in the world today. We recently had, well, sort of recently in the context of how crazy the world is, maybe light years ago, but this was a conversation around the COVID discussion and the military overlap. The interview with Destiny entitled "The Military Intelligence Hidden Hand Driving the COVID-19 Injections." She's been doing really great work on just investigatory avenues about a lot of really important things that people are missing. And we talked about at this point around the COVID-19 manipulation. We've talked a bunch of, but a lot of different things that relate to transhumanism, about the way the direction of the government is going. Today, we're going to get into, what she's investigating now and a lot of other things going on in the world that we both find very interesting. So Destiny, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. How are you?
Great to be back. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk with you today because I always enjoy your insight and your investigations on these things, because when we talked about the military overlap to that and, the different parts of it that I hadn't seen until I talked with you, it's really, it's interesting to see the different parts that we can pick up. And this is a starting point. It's a good point to make about why it's important that independent media, work together, collaborate, and share ideas, because it's like we get so siloed in these different directions. So it's great to have you back on today.
It is great to touch base because, we always have overlapping, investigations into things, check in and see who's got what angle and dig a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's start something I've been asking, people I have on free interviews lately, because I always have things that are in my mind, and I can tend to kind of just, I want to get into how I think, what you see on the things that I'm seeing. But right now, what's the forefront of your mind? What are you investigating? What's something that jumps to your mind that is not, whatever the most important in your mind right now with what you're looking at?
Well, most important right now is that, I'm now, and I've always been convinced, but now I'm thoroughly convinced that Moderna's shell company is a CIA company, A, and
Mm.
B, the technology that they utilize, that they owned, comes from a long line of biological weapons manufacturing for the United States government. And it's specifically from the Baxter lab incident in 2009, the big H5N1 live influenza, went to 16 laboratories in Europe from Baxter International. That technology was purchased by Nanotherapeutics, which became Resilient.
Mm.
And so their new platform for this new vaccine for COVID and flu is based on that faulty technology that could have caused one of the worst pandemics in history.
We talked about this in that last interview, correct? With
Yes,
resilience.
the Baxter thing is new. The Baxter thing is was unforeseen. I had no clue that resilience came from. Well, I knew it came from Nanotherapeutics. I did not know Nanotherapeutics didn't have really their own technology. They had to purchase it, and they did it 4 years after that lab incident that they never were held accountable for. And it was
Really are.
a big incident, and they kind of just brushed it on the rug, sold it off for parts, and Nanotherapeutics reaps the benefit today.
Well, so since we go where you're talking about this, and I pointed the interview, and I know it's a big topic, but we give us just the couple minute encapsulation of the resilience aspect, and then flesh out what you're talking about. I'm interested. So the Moderna part, because we just saw the interesting Moderna, more than one, by the way, but the recent one for children approved by the government. And we can get into the new story about how it was done on RFK's vacation and how it actually happened, which doesn't seem to change the reality of all the other mRNA shots they support. But, give us your thought, or break that down for us on the Moderna part.
So Moderna, I know this like the back of my hand. So of course, Moderna is a 2010 company, started out of flagship pioneering by a whole bunch of essentially Harvard graduates. And a lot of them are still on the board. The Harvard people on the board with Moderna, they're also on the board of flagship pioneering. People like Stephen Hahn, former FDA commissioners, on the board of that. So there's a lot of sticky people connected to it. And Moderna never had a viable product that was FDA approved until after the pandemic. And so they had one, I think, right before December or something, but it wasn't for, I don't think it was coronavirus, of course. I think it was for Zika that they were working on. And it was still hadn't been approved just yet before the pandemic. And so it just bothers me that the government invested literally 45% worth of the vaccines in this distributed in the country were given to this 10-year-old company that had zero products before. But not only did that company get that incredible contract for, a miracle contract in the largest pharmaceutical IPO in history, but the fact of the matter is that they hired a company to do the job for them because they were unequipped to do it. And that company, Resilience, underwent 4 or 5 different name changes over the years, but started off essentially as a company called Nanotherapeutics, which almost exclusively made biological weapon medical countermeasures for the United States government, like botulinum toxin and the plague. And it got bought up and changed the name a couple times, like 2017 is a big one. And then in 2020 was the big rebranding where they removed most of the scientists and replaced them with people that are connected to the intelligence community, like the Vice President Chris Darby, head of InQtel until this last year, uh,
Interesting.
20 years ahead of InQtel. So also in the CIA Memorial Fund, you've got Joe Lonsdale, which is, of course, the co-founder of
Right.
Palantir, sits on the board, and Robert Nelson, who's Council of Foreign Relations. And there's a whole bunch of just people that don't belong on this fake pharmaceutical company that they pretended was new. Um,
Mhm.
just in reality, they wanted you to think it was new because if nobody would pay for a biological weapon manufacturer to be making your vaccine.
Well, this is an interesting overlap to, the Palantir, obvious point of it, the Palantir overlap with the current direction. But as you mentioned, all the different other moving parts in this, that, the thought should at least be considered that this was a moving part that led to this larger agenda today, right? So this was all, because there's a lot of the technocratic parts that were sort of initiated, rolled out, justified by what happened during that time frame. That's interesting.
There's a lot. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's still moving now. It's very sticky because we never really had to look at this medical world as a military intelligence apparatus like we have
Mhm.
now. Because the reality is that's, InQtel is heavily involved in our medicine now, which is alarming. They have brought 2 new laboratories into existence that are working on, well, whatever they're working on.
Right.
It's not really something we get privy to.
And it's hard to know. I mean, that's the scary part too, is that what they do work on, I mean, it's clear that they don't really consider the consequences of what these things can do to the human species, to any number of things. And we've seen that throughout history. But let's
Oh,
start.
yeah.
Let's go. Good. You have a comment on that?
Oh, I said, oh yeah, like there's a crazy phenomenon that Ray Kurzweil, who I'm pretty sure everyone can consider the modern father of transhumanism,
Mm.
and these agendas that we don't want to go towards. In his book, The Singularity is Near, which is Yuval Harari's Bible. It's in chapter, I think it's in chapter 5 of that book that, or 25, sorry, that he lists one pharmaceutical company that he said would bridge the gap between humans and technology, and that company was nanotherapeutics. And so,
Mm.
like, the agenda is underlying for a long time, and of all the companies in the world, it's just like we really have to take a different perspective of what we mean when we say medicine today.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget Moderna, and the early phase of this was the one that a lot of us called out as the one that would be the one, because
Mhm.
Fauci and his people around him were invested in that one. So there's always, or even pointing out even further that what you're familiar with, that Bob Langer, connected to
Yeah.
Charles Lieber, was the scientific co-founder of Moderna. All
Yep.
these parts, and that you're pointing out that nanotherapeutics, as one of the elements that was the real backing, or however you would frame that, as the creation of this, was
Mhm.
the tie back to the the technocratic kind of
Yeah.
Palantir
Peter
universe.
Thiel is really, like, people don't understand this Palantir grip is
Mm,
so deep in HHS. I think it's in 27 different sub-agencies in HHS with their,
wow.
Foundry and a million other, Gotham, all these other programs that they have different names, just like Tiberius. The same
Yeah.
program, just like different names. And that's embedded. And then you've got like Joe Lonsdale and Resilience. And Peter Thiel has been up to no good. I did a big report on his funding of human experimentation in 2017.
I was just looking
Uh,
at that.
that is a to me, that's one of the most wild stories. I
Yeah.
can't believe it.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we see the fact with the Fauci examples of the dogs, and I think they're all invested in these like things that they would do in places where they don't think people can see. That's changing today, unfortunately. I would argue, not that we see that, but that everything everywhere in the world is being seen. That ultimately that they're not, can't hide as much anymore. But I think they're doing that kind of experimentation all over the world. I think it's normal for these kind of sociopathic endeavors. But the MAHA overlapped all this, and then we can come back actually to the
Yeah.
you mentioned the kind of the overlap to this, and we know, as you mentioned, the Palantir was before that was the total information awareness. They had the InQtel overlap to that, the only funder for a very long time, and you point
Mhm.
out the InQtel connection to all of what we just discussed. So we can talk about the interesting overlap of the kind of DARPA
The
background
DARPA's
overlap
big
with
too.
xAI, right? But
Yeah.
let's start with the MAHA point, because I think this is really important. That I think Americans, let me, in a broader point, both MAGA and Americans, and just anybody in general in this country, I think it's been shown that most Americans very clearly want good things for this country, want
Yeah.
liberty and freedom and democracy, and that's why they pretend. Whether you think those are good or not, the point is they ultimately want good for this country, and that they pretend that's what they are and what they're doing. And MAHA was an example of that, as they used what people wanted, sort of like Trump in his first term and his second, to get them to believe that this was going to be different, right? And so before I even bring up some examples, you know, what's your general sentiment of MAHA and the validity behind RFK Jr. and, you know, what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I went and rallied up in DC for Kennedy. I went and campaigned for him when MAHA joined forces with MAGA. It was called the Rescue Republic Rally. I know Derek Rose is up there for
Mhm.
events up there, and I went hard. I was so excited. I'm very disappointed. I
Mhm.
think I share sentiment with a lot of the MAHA people. They were very, very disappointed. We feel very swindled. I think a lot of
Me
the
too.
MAGA supporters feel the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I would say swindled because I was very skeptical and doubtful of it, but I definitely was let down. I mean, I always have hope that these people will be what people want them to be. I have hope that Trump will still turn out to be that despite all the evidence, you know, so, but I very much still think that RFK Jr. has a background of work that is still worthy of praise. And I think it still has positive effects. I still, every time I say this, every time it comes up, I still don't get it. I don't understand there. That's, you know, when you come to that moment where you're like, we don't understand why these choices are made. Don't let that stop you from seeing the obvious reality of the dishonest choices. But, you know, it could be blackmail. It could be that he's always lying to us. I don't really know, but I was let down too, because I really wanted this to go in a positive direction, even if everything else went bad. That was kind of the logic of the voting process for a lot of people. It's like,
Yeah.
well, at least we'll get this. And sadly, that doesn't seem to be happening. And so I agree with you. It was a big letdown. But let's start with this one. This is the newest one. We were just talking about briefly before we started. Again, and now, to be clear, this is Trump and his administration, but the point is that people had hoped that RFK being president would sort of guide the health direction for all of this. But Donald Trump has recently just made it allowed $50 billion of investment from AstraZeneca into the U.S. government or into the infrastructure, you know, whatever it will amount to be. And I'll play the clip first, then we can talk about it.
A big announcement. AstraZeneca, the big drug company, is going to spend $50 billion, just announced $50 billion in the United States in order to build various places all over the country, big manufacturing plants, pharmaceutical plants all over the country. So that's an honor. And he said they did that because of the election and because of the fact that the tariffs are placed. So they're building their facilities in New York. $50 billion, that's a big investment. And it's going to be a very good investment. I have no doubt about it. So thank you to AstraZeneca.
Interesting. So what are your thoughts?
It just hurts to hear him say thank you to these companies.
Right.
It's because and you hear that money, you hear $50 billion, and that's all good and well for these companies. I'm sure financially for the country it'll do well, but I advocate for the vaccine injured every single day. And a lot of them, is financial is a struggle because they can't sue, they can't pay the bills. And so I hear money like that being tossed around with these companies that are responsible. I'm upset. I
Yeah.
understand it from a, manufacturing perspective that we need to make sure that we have medication stateside. I know that's a massive issue. It's also an issue they should have taken care of a long time ago and not let it get as out of hand as it is in the first place. But regardless, reality, like you said, we have to look at how things are necessarily and how things are. We do need manufacturing in the United States. I'm not necessarily happy about it because I hear that money and I know that you know, just and AstraZeneca too. I just have a lot of issues with
Mhm.
AstraZeneca. Their early work on coronavirus work, they worked with a lot of the people from Moderna in the early days. Kenneth Chan worked at AstraZeneca for, of all things, he wanted to make like a vaccine for myocarditis before joining the board of Moderna. So, and he worked at AstraZeneca for many, many years.
Yeah.
It's concerning, but
Yeah, and it's disappointing. You know, I mean, to your point of manufacturing, like I, in a fundamental sense, yeah, but I would agree. But you don't need AstraZeneca to do that. You know, so it's like and
exactly.
you could argue that the money is, but to me, that then that the argument that would then be that we would be willing to sell out to have the money for that. You know, I would argue most people in the even just the conservative side of this would disagree with that, as I think we both do. You know, it's not the right choice. But you wonder whether that's Donald Trump just being a businessman and saying this matters and maybe not hearing, which I find it almost impossible, what his base thinks about that. Or this is where I come back to it, like the Stargate platform to start. Like how, there's an obvious disconnect between what people want, what he told them would happen and what's now happening, and that's just very hard. I just think people need to start recognizing that either he's just same as all the rest of the politicians. He promises you what you want and then does what the government wants anywhere, what they want to do anyway, or something else is driving these choices. But it's just not what people were promised. And I think we need to start being real about that, because we all, I think, want the real positive outcome. We want the better health directions. We want the right things for this country. And if we believe in the ideologues, I don't think that's ever going to happen personally, but there's
Right. Well, I think a part of the reason why there's a massive disconnect between what Trump promised in terms of the MAHA perspective and what we're seeing. I think a lot of that problem is I think too many people in Trump's inner circle um, are either intimidated or being overly polite, and
I
they're not
agree.
having certain conversations about this. I think that, Susie Wiles, of course, keeps anybody away from Trump that she thinks would hurt the image. And I know something that probably would hurt the image of Trump is him admitting he was wrong with Operation Warp Speed and rescinding a few things that he has done, because he's not the kind of man to do that in general, and it's part of his image and brand to be a certain absolute kind of man. It's a very populist, strategy to do. You're very on your own and independent. It's well respected. That doesn't include a lot of apologies and withdrawals from things. So,
Hmm.
from a PR perspective, I can understand the hesitation, but from us as the voters who really put, our money where our mouth is in terms of supporting Trump, this is something that is a big problem. In my
Mhm.
It's a big problem.
Well, what as always, and again, this is just politicians. It's not unique to Trump, but this is putting PR before the real outcome. PR before what Americans want. And even if it's secondary, like just barely behind that, maybe even of the logic that the PR will lead to that positive choice, is still putting PR before the actual choice. And I think this is what we always see in politics, and it's just sad. And, even people that want to go into politics who somehow believe they can work and maneuver through it, I think throughout history, we've shown ourselves that's just not the case. And plenty more examples. I'll just kind of rattle a few more off. That, for example, this is Jason Bassler points this out. I just saw this one today. Section 453 was approved yesterday. It provides pesticide companies, including Monsanto Bayer and others, Syngenta, near total protection from lawsuits. And this is coming out through the current administration and the EPA. I'm hoping this won't pass. This is the Free Thought Project talking about this, but it doesn't seem like it's official just yet. But these are the directions that are happening. And I'm worried about these. You probably saw this one about the Moderna shot, but RFK's claiming that he was on vacation and they fired them. It does seem to be what happened, but it doesn't change the Stargate platform, the self-amplifying mRNA shot. This was the EPA release about fighting, or in regard to a guide on geoengineering, where Trump 2.0 is basically, he says it says right here, federal government is not aware that there's ever been a contrail intentionally formed over the United States, basically denying geoengineering, but that we already know is real.
Don't we have legislation in Tennessee that banned it? So, they've banned nothing. It's like
Well,
it's like the Epstein list. It just doesn't exist.
Exactly. The point is, it's obvious that everyone knows that Harvard has a program for stratospheric aerosol injection. Like, it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
But they're just trying to distance it by using definitions and names. The point in Tennessee, by the way, is they did do a positive step, but it's only a certain area of
Elevation. Yeah.
elevation. Thank you. And if they simply go above it, then it's not classified as that. And so that's how they're still doing it. This was
So
the
the
EPA.
language is going to
Oh,
kill
sorry.
us. I swear. That's what's going to hang us
I
up
know.
to dry is the wording of. I say that to people all the time. If we are not careful, the way they use this news speak, it's going to be our end. I swear.
I agree. And it's utilized by left and right, just your government constantly, right? They play these word games and they abuse things. So we get kind of lost in the minutia of it all. This one is about the fluoride aspect, which is a huge stance for RFK. And now they're appealing the ruling about removing it from your water. I don't know if you saw that. That's
I
frustrating.
did not.
Yeah. The Trump administration is now appealing it. But Michael Conant, who is the lead behind this as the lawyer, he's from the Fluoride Action Network. That's what he just discussed this on the 11th. And that's what we expected. Derek wrote the article about this. And are they going to appeal it? And we both argued most likely, even though they said they would lean into getting it out of our water. And now they're fighting to keep it in our water.
Like now, can't people see that like the studies have been released and acknowledged by the United States government that
Right.
have fluoride in water lowers your child's IQ. That has been submitted and approved by the government now. And now they want to so now I see this as an attack. If you
Yeah.
know now, and I know now, if you're trying to force it on me, now you're hurting me intentionally. People need to see it that way because that's what it is at this
I
point.
wholeheartedly agree. And the shot's the same thing, right? I mean, we know that. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, you have Children's Health Defense now actually suing Senator Kennedy or Secretary Kennedy. Now, excuse me. Our first
No,
priority.
I did not hear this either.
Yeah, I was surprised myself. This is from yesterday. And because, they've been criticizing some things he's done, but they pretty much kind of stayed that we still support him. And maybe they still do in a general sense, but they're saying, yes, CHD is now funding a lawsuit against him because their first priority will always be children's health. I just think that's an important stance to take.
Good for them. Good for them.
Now, one positive note is that we have seen the U.S., at least they're stating this now, pulling out of the Gavi. You've covered this a lot. What does it stand for again? The Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization, right there.
Yeah, thank you.
And so that's a good thing. But I wanted to end with this on this point of the segment, the conversation. That is a good thing, period, right? I'm glad to see that. But the question is, what do you think about that with everything else we're seeing? Do you think that is, maybe we're beyond the COVID-19, like they got what they wanted from that, and we're moving on to technocracy, and so it's not important anymore? Do you think that it's the money will just find a way around it some other way, like it did in the past? What are your thoughts on that, and then the general direction, since with what we just looked at?
I think that Gavi is it was never really the United States' concern in terms of what it was doing. It's a more international thing. It's affected more like African countries, Southeast Asian countries, and South American countries. And also with the amount of funding I'm imagining they're losing from the cutting of USAID, that they're going to have to resort to less programs, less places, and pick and choose. And since Gavi seems to exceed internationally, I would imagine that they're going to just stick with that, and they'll withdraw from the U.S. anyways. I think CEPI is more the concern I have in terms of their direction and their effect on COVID. The whole, make a vaccine in 100 days idea, that came from CEPI. That came from
that's with the AI direction, right?
And they're going AI direction. They're going mRNA direction. So Gavi is more of those, tropical diseases that they want, malaria, polio vaccine. And same with JEPI. Those are to me, very similar in the fact that they're not necessarily as impactful in the United States. Of course, for other countries, I'm concerned for them. I'm glad we're pulled out, but I'd rather see us pull out of CEPI a lot faster than I would, because they just don't affect us as much, I think, as CEPI does.
Yeah. And that's kind of my mindset on it, is that it doesn't seem like that, as much as that's I just in a general sense, I think that's the direction people want to see from them. But what's the real material benefit? Like, did we, and that there's some in the larger sense, but what you're saying is there's much more. It doesn't really change what's actually happening in a larger sense. And I think that's important to think about. And maybe that was sort of a head fake, like just here's a bone, positive step, but it doesn't really, but we're still rolling out mRNA shots. We're still doing, that's my concern, is that,
It feels like the whole administration right now. That's what this whole administration so far has felt like, is like,
yes,
that's nice, but that's not what we wanted. It always feels like this kind of compromise with absolutely everything that has been presented to us. Like, okay, it's not an outright war with Iran, and you're just going to drop some bombs on their nuclear facilities. Okay, all right, it's not, closing the borders down completely. You're finding all the children. It's slowing it down, and we'll work on getting people out of here. It's
right.
It's getting some. It's not a satisfying meal.
Yeah. And then within all of those partial efforts, there's all sorts of technocratic rationale and like things that are rolling out to make that, partially happen, biometrics and scans and Palantir scan, it's like, and so it's clear that that's, seems like the primary agenda, if you want my opinion. I think that's obvious. But let's talk about that overlapping point. So this is what we brought up a moment ago. And this is actually really, I can't believe this doesn't get more attention. It is a really crazy reality.
It did good. I was actually surprised, like, for the post. I mean, whenever I just find something randomly like super interesting, I'm like, and I didn't even look for it. I was looking at Peter Heinem from DARPA, and that's from his testimony, that first image there. And I was reading it because it's from 2019, and I was looking at, like I always do, all the things in 2019 that indicated COVID was coming, which is it's enormous, the amount of indications that are findable, and Peter Heinem is one of the contributors to that evidence. And that was from, I think, November 2019. He had a testimony before Congress for the emerging threats with the Armed Senate Committee. So they, I was just reading his little thing and then his testimony, and there was xAI, and I was like, what? What? Like Elon's xAI? And they're like, no, they're different, but they are essentially the exact same.
Right. Well, my audience is familiar with this. We did that report on December 2024.
I watched it. I watched when you sent it to me.
Yeah, I just called it the quiet transition from DARPA's xAI to Elon's xAI. And just a quick breakdown is, so we have the applied AI letters post on onlinelibrary.wiley.com, and it says DARPA's explainable AI xAI program. And so the quick breakdown is that this ended right before a matter of months before Elon took over. So they say that this is done. And the whole thing was about them finding, basically having an AI system that could explain its actions and would ask, is kind of the general idea. There's more to it. And so then they ended it. Elon takes over Twitter, and then right away starts xAI, and that's supposed to be a whole new thing. But if you even look on anything Twitter related, you'll note that they have these things up here where was it? Somewhere where you can hit a thing that says explain this. And it's like that's the
Yeah.
whole point. And so either way,
That's
it's
if you hit the grok button, that's what it does. The grok
is that what
will
it was?
yeah, if you hit grok
Yeah.
on any post.
Yeah, either way, the point is that it's the same general concept. And so then you can go through even further and find that they're, and also to your point about total information awareness that becomes Palantir. I mean, there's more examples. This is what they do, right? But you can have then overlapping points about this. You have BlackRock investing in xAI. Then you have xAI merging with X, which was already the point. And then, of course, you have xAI merging, or at least working alongside Palantir. You can see these steps going forward. And then the bigger point around it was that Elon Musk, working with this is Biden's administration, working to build the largest spy satellite network in the world, around the whole world, and that the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, working with him and utilizing his AI to build it, literally says, after we do this quote was, now you can't hide because we have eyes, or now you're constantly being looked at. Elon helping that. We have Space Forces contracting with SpaceX for a new secretive Milnet SATCOM network. This is a low Earth orbit network that they're building out. It's the same conversation. The difference, Israel is involved in this one with SpaceX, using SpaceX to launch their own version of this same problem. So bringing it back to the larger point, we have this kind of all-encompassing technocratic AI satellite. That's what the xAI is. This is his AI, right? And so it's all intertwined in this. And now they're building out this basically all-encompassing Earth sort of spy network for everything, Starlink, all of it. So
Skynet, like a new Skynet, but like
exactly. So the point of the DARPA origin point, I think, is so important because this is where it all stems from. This is the mind behind all these things. So that's where I have seen. So go ahead, give me your thoughts on where this goes. And I really find this to be an alarming kind of step in the direction of the technocratic kind of panopticon structure that's building out.
Yeah, I really started getting concerned right about like November when the elections was going on, because I was noticing some of the picks Trump had with his first nominations, some with Michael Kratsios, and that was the very first red flag I had, that had this combination of heavy X influence and work, and then also having this heavy DARPA-esque background, and seeing them come together. Because Michael Kratsios, for those who don't know, was the CTO, or the chief technology officer, under Trump's first term. And then he was considered the fourth most powerful person in the Pentagon, and he's quite young for his position. And he was the chief of staff at, I think was it at Mithril or Thiel? It's one of Peter Thiel's top companies. But he was his chief of staff for Peter Thiel for 10 years, for a decade. And then he goes in this administration, he's back in as the even bigger directorship with Office of Science Technology Policy. And he's the one who brought in the mainframe for the 5G and the quantum computing initiative in the United States. He brought in all those major technology issues. And he also sits on the board for a company called Scale AI, who's ran by a whole bunch of people that sit on the board for xAI, same people, a lot of them. And so, of course, they got brought in with Doge. And I was very concerned about this merger of Elon and DARPA, that we're seeing with a few members of, either somebody from Scale AI that works with xAI, or xAI, or from Peter Thiel, but they're kind of overlapping and tossing these people between, but they all have the same goal. They're all government contractors. They all want to essentially make the control grid and get their piece of the pie on that, because it is being created and everyone wants to get their paycheck.
What do you think about the difference of the AIs? Like, I wonder how much these things are separate. Like what you're kind of highlighting there is like OpenAI is what's tapped for Stargate, except at that same moment, Donald Trump's working directly with Elon Musk, and he's the one saying that his AI is going to destroy the world. And so it's like, what a weird choice. But my question, I guess, is do you think that these things are one ultimate program and these are different parts of it and they're more working together behind the scenes? Or how do you see the different vying elements of AI right now?
Well, I think we have very few examples to go off of in terms of the scale. So it is really like new territory. The only thing close to it that we have essentially is like Interpol, in terms of how widely connected it is with one unified system. I think Interpol, in my opinion, is probably the best kind of thing we have. And I need to investigate how Interpol came around exactly to get like a good answer for that, because I think that would be the most likely answer, is usually the correct one. So seeing how they've done it before, the government's not they're not that smart, like, to be honest, with all the resources and people they have. They tend to, repeat themselves, even when it's to their detriment and our detriment quite often. So, uh, I'm not sure how it's gonna happen. I would imagine that at the rate of kind of this monopolization that has been the trend for the past 20, 30 years in the United States, even though we used to admonish that, the capture by just one singular entity seems to be the trend, and I think that they don't have a problem letting Palantir like do the whole work on this. I think it might start with a few companies that maybe don't necessarily have to do with the certain software parts that I think Palantir will
Mm.
take care of all in all. There'll be other, I think, pieces of this because it's going to be massive. I think the control grid. I fear it being the day that like Elon Musk owns all the satellites that are going to be
Right.
communication. Going to offer free universal Wi-Fi. Like this is my vision of worst case scenario, and everyone's going to get it. Everyone's going to use it. It's going to be wonderful. But then, market crash or whatever reason, stock, stakeholders upset, whatever. They're going to be like, okay, look, because we give it for free, we have to kind of stop doing that. We're going to let you still have it free, but you have to get the Neuralink and we're gonna
Right.
and there's gonna be people in this world, after 10 years being addicted to free wherever you want perfect internet, there are gonna be people, and I think that'll be dumb enough, in my personal opinion, to like
Right.
actually get that. And so like my biggest fear is that it results, of course, at the end of the day, in my mind, in the government's hands. That's gonna be the unifying connector. We live in the world of public-private partnerships, and it's just fascism. It's all it is. It's a pretty way to say fascism. But that's where we're heading. Palantir, I think, will be a big proponent of that for the government and smaller, also, military industrial complex companies. I don't see it any other way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a very clear. I mean, a lot of facts back that up, and then the Palantir element of it. Why that would be given so much influence. It could just be, and you're right. I think this is not new. The government, I think, has been allowing that kind of that dynamic for a long time. But Palantir, you could argue the logic is just that they think that the only way they could beat China in that race is by letting them just have every possible access to every data point we have. And, that's what they did. They just pulled out all the stops. And who cares about the Constitution? Who cares about your privacy? Clearly, So what do you think about the overlap of Doge and like, just your thoughts on Doge in general and how that just kind of disappeared and like the AI overlapped that, right? Like my worry was AI government. And was that just what Doge was meant to do? And is that still happening? Where do you see all that?
I think, I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk in general. So,
Mhm.
and which bizarre. I know no one would ever believe me, but you could find proof of this, like on my BitChute way back in 2021 or two. I predicted Doge, Trump, and Elon would be a thing. I didn't know how, but the signs were there, and sure enough, it happened. And I was just mind blown when it came together because I literally had videos where I was like, guys, I don't know what's going on, but for some reason, I just know Doge, Trump, and Elon are going to be a thing. And I didn't even know it was going to be an agency yet. I meant the coin at the time, but like,
Mhm.
it's so that kind of red flagged me because it's like, why would I even remember something like that and pick up on something like that? It's usually a sign that's like, I should have paid attention more. In my,
Mhm.
I take that as a sign I should have paid attention more because it probably wasn't a good thing. And a lot of people, myself included, were very happy about the USAID portion of Doge where they went after them because everyone, I mean, I've known this, you've known this for decades. So like everyone knows the USAID is a cutout for CIA. They have
Right.
been for such a long time, and so many other agencies are, but they didn't really cut USAID, really.
Right.
That was the part that was like my first hang up with Doge was like, but they didn't really get rid. Everyone's like, they did. I was like, no, they just reabsorbed it
Yeah,
into the
yeah.
State
Not
Department.
really.
They just took off the name from the agency door and said,
Right.
"Hey, Rubio, this is your place now." Like, that's
Right.
it. And I don't trust Rubio either, which is, and it's for the most silly reason, but certain things get under my skin that I just my discernment says just don't look the other way, and
Well,
hi
really
his
quickly,
voting
Jesse,
in was a problem for me.
one of the many reasons that I respect your work and respect you in general, right, is that it's such an interesting thing that so many people in this field are willing to, like we talked about to begin with, just to ignore that little detail because it doesn't look good for what they want to be the case or who they want to support. Is that you want these, we all want the good thing. We want this to change. We want spending to be cut. But then when it obviously is not what happens, you're willing to call it out. It's
I'm
shocking how
calling it
rare
out.
that is in this field right now. But I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
Thank you. I find the same with you and same with Derek and Whitney. There's very few, like I said to you earlier, there's very few, and I don't mean it to like sound snobby. It's just like when you are a researcher and you are a reporter, you're working on your own stories a lot. It's very hard to take time to enjoy each other's work as good as we
Mm.
all find each other's work to be. And I do particularly, if I talk anybody highly, it's because they're impartial, and I think that is the only way through this. Like the only way through this is to be impartial, and you have to be the person that says, that's not, it might be, a little, inappropriate for the conversation. It might be uncomfortable, but somebody has to say it. And so I appreciate that comment. And I feel the same towards you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's my point. My thought on it, to get one step further, is that, look, let's just say it came down to something that is the truth, and it's you can prove it, and yet that truth will be detrimental or just damaging, maybe just uncomfortable, inconvenient for the group that you support, and maybe even a group that genuinely wants to do the right thing. It is still you should still point it out. It's principles and integrity. And the moment we lose that, the moment we start making rationale about why you should do the wrong thing for the right reason, we're lost. And that's politics for you, right? So I just think that's important to think about.
Yeah, and I wish more people would adopt it. It's
Mhm.
very difficult with the polarization that's gone on in politics lately. I understand. I also think we're just so desperate as a nation for any sort of normalcy, or for just to get a break. I think we're just so desperate for that. A lot of people have resorted to that ideologue that has this whole, populism or whatever kind of cult mentality, because it's comfortable. It feels good, to have a group to belong with. But I strongly believe in the words of Mickey Mantle, where he's like, "Gangs are where cowards go to hide."
Mm,
You replace gang with bipartisan party or whatever group you
right.
identify with. To me, it's one of those things. You actually pointed out a quote by Theodore Roosevelt in that DARPA video you did. I have adopted it. I love it, and
Mhm.
I do think if you can't criticize your own, and criticize the government,
Is
your
right.
ability to claim Americanism is very difficult.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Very
This
difficult.
is one of my favorites. Yeah, it's to announce that there must be no criticism of the president, or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public. Very, extreme and good, and rightly so, right? It's like there is a line once you do that, you have lost the plot. And as a Republican saying this, I think that's important. But yeah,
Yeah, I love that. I saw that and I was like, I'm glad I saw it because I did not know that quote. And it's very reminiscent, I think, and I would love to visit his live so I could ask him if this weighed on his speech, but the April 27, 1961 speech by John F. Kennedy with the Newspaper Publishers Association, talking about how important it is for the transparency to the American people, because of course he's talking to journalists and publishers about that responsibility that they had. And
Mhm.
that, he said, I not only, I don't dissuade any criticism, I welcome it, because he said that Solon, the Greek philosopher Solon, had said that for those who don't criticize, essentially, you don't have any part in society. Like, what's your point? Because
Mhm.
you're just here to be ruled, essentially. If you're not going to willing to criticize and make sure you stand up for yourself in terms of what you deserve to know.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. But I am always, right, lately pointing out the positive spin on this is that I very much think that people are starting to come around. I really do. And I think that, as always, though, there's always another tripwire. There's always another minefield to pass, the QAnon and Russiagate. There's always something that's grabbing people, pulling them back into the partisanship. But I think moment by moment, I mean, even over the last couple of decades, like it's been a chipping away at this. And I think that's kind of what the end game is here, which I point out often, is that they need to get to a place where that just no longer matters, right? We're going full dictatorship, full authoritarianism. We're going to get back to that position, but framing it as we have to get there to save democracy, save the Constitution by destroying it on the way. That's what I
Yeah.
think is happening.
There's a political phenomenon. I've written threads on it because I think think not only is it wildly important to understand, but it's very telling. There's a political phenomenon called democratic backsliding, and it's a term utilized in politics and in civil discourse about what happens to a government that's a democracy initially, any form of democracy, and the systematic detraction of its validity to the point that it turns into a totalitarian regime. And now
Mhm.
it happens to many countries, happen like Venezuela, happen lots of countries where they have a democracy of some form, and from within, there's like 4 or 5 manifestations of it in phases that it goes through. We're currently in this. We have been for years now. The scary thing about this process is so far they've never found a country recover from it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's the scary thing. So they're not saying that we can't. They're just saying, well, we just haven't seen that yet, but we are indeed in this process. And what's even more alarming is the definition and manifestations on Wikipedia in 2019 changed. They deleted 2 of those manifestations and criteria in 2020. And when you look at what those deletions were, one of them is the government creates a sense of emergency, a state of emergency, and
Right.
acquires more power. And that's one of the ones they deleted. And the other one was I think it was something along the lines of immigration, flooding immigration,
Of course.
and like kind of babying the minority class over the majority class, and especially through the judicial system. So like making
Mhm.
laws for the small groups like transgender or whatever,
Right.
those things that largely the entire population is against is a symptom of this. And they deleted it so that we wouldn't know how closely, like how deep we were into it. But that's what it's really a new, it feels new and different because it is new and different what's going on.
Yeah. It's just, I think it feels like we're in the midst, in the kind of process of like a dying empire. Not to say that America is going to go away, but like we are watching the structure break down. And that's a good thing if you understand that we are not represented, in my opinion, by this broken system. Like American people can change this and go back to whether you want it to be a democracy or hopefully, in my mind, we get beyond the idea that we need a government, but I know we're not there yet. But I think
Yeah,
we're in this
I don't think so.
process, and I think it's positive.
It's definitely progress, but, like, there's also this kind of pendulum effect, I'm sure you, like, observe this and just in politics and social society that we have this very sick pendulum of things where it goes left and right, it
Mhm.
goes extreme to extreme, and, so as much as there are people waking up, and I do see that, like, every day, and it's phenomenal, it's really wonderful to see, and I watch it just, like, over time, friends of mine, space hosts on X, and I watch the opinions go, from pretty radical ideas to, like, softening up,
Hmm.
becoming more multi-perspective and being more,
Mhm.
impartial, and I'm very encouraged by that, and I see myself becoming more, encouraged as I continue to try to do so because I think it is something that at some point you have to kinda take it consciously. It
Yeah.
can't happen naturally, subconsciously, but there comes a point where you kinda have to be conscious about it because there is so much opposition to that kind of thinking.
Mhm.
You have to take it seriously, but there's also this group, the opposite of those who are kind of enlightening, as you will, that are doubling down, tripling down.
Yep.
They are, biting down on the hook of certainty that is caught in their lip, and they will not
Mm.
let go of it. They are, if some of them, because like the extremes are getting more extreme, but a lot of people are also coming to more rational terms. So it's like
Yeah.
it's just a pendulum right now, and it's really interesting to see because by and large, I think more people are becoming more reasonable, but
Yeah.
the few who are holding out are becoming increasingly dramatically unreasonable, like the Mark Levin
Yeah.
people, like people who are not aligning with the people are really buckling down.
And they stand out like crazy. And I think that's important, right? And it shows you like you just can't acknowledge, you have to acknowledge one, that they're not aligned with the group they keep pretending they're aligned with, which is just, whatever conservatives, whatever it is. And I see the same things happening on the left in similar ways. But just this is breaking down. And I do think that's very positive to call out. Let's talk about the example of this that I think is clear. I mean, it's more than this. I think COVID-19 was an obvious example. I think Israel's genocide is causing that in a large way as well. But the Epstein conversation, which is connected to Israel in obvious ways as well, but just what this is doing to the partisan kind of, let's just say the MAGA movement in general. And I don't mean the influences we're discussing right there. Like we said, that's team sport politics. They're going to, whatever Trump just said, that's the best thing ever. That's what they're doing. No matter what, it's just embarrassing. But there's the MAGA movement, which I argue most want good things for this country, who just been tricked or believe what they claim, what they were promised. I don't know. But this did have a very interesting kind of breakdown that there's no client list. There was no suicide, no blackmail. Now it's a complete hoax that Obama did himself. So just on that, give me your thoughts on what was your take on this?
Immediately, and I said it to you before we started, the language, the words are like the whole there's no client list. That is clever. That is such good word manipulation. Orwell himself seems to have written it. It's wonderful.
Hmm.
Wonderful in a horrible way. I mean, of course,
Yeah, right.
facetious. But the client list thing was my first indication that like, okay, this reminds me of COVID with gain of function. We did know gain of function. There is no client list.
Right.
Okay, but like describe what there is and let's see if that matches what I'm asking you about. And
Right.
you
Right.
find that it always does. Is there names of people who hung out with Epstein that may or may not have been doing things with children on his island? Is there a list of that? Yeah, there is. That's what I'm talking about when I say Epstein list, and it's the same thing
Right.
with, like, gain of function, like, okay, did they gain function in the change of an experiment? Did that happen? Yeah, well, then
Right.
that's gain of function, so we really have to get a hold of the language, and shame on the government for taking such cruel, but very simple to point out propaganda tactics it's rudimentary, but 'cause it works, and
Yeah.
so
Right.
we
Right.
resort to it.
Oh, and you make an excellent point. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that I was just saying that was my first big red flag right there.
Yeah, yeah, and you make an excellent point. Is that you know the idea that there is a? I mean, you could even just get rid of the word list entirely. Do you have data? Do you have evidence of people who committed crimes through this network? Obviously, I mean, the court documents from before, I think 2018 say that. They explicitly say that they claim that Bondi, not when she claimed it's on her desk, but in other interviews, as you saw, we have hours and hours of porn, and not just the porn she claimed it was after the fact, but like the actual evidence. And so you just can't hide from this, you know, that it's very clear. And so they say, you're right, there's no list. Well, they're just pretending like there's no one list in one place. Okay, fine. Give us the evidence. And this is why I think most people on the conservative side, I think I have it up right here. Even Rob Schneider just put this out. I think this was today. And just said, you know, it's the Chris Farley.
Yeah.
As, what was his name? I forget the character. For love of God, just
Chris
arrest
Farley.
someone already. Well, yeah, but Chris Farley as
Oh,
what?
the character, the down by the river guy.
Yeah. What was his?
I can't think of it.
That's gonna drive me crazy. But you know, the point is like these are hardcore supporters of the team of Trump, and it's like, look, just like it's not even just about Epstein. How about Fauci or Bill Gates or anybody they claim was altering information since he got elected, or people that were in Social Security stealing, all these things, all the claims they made of all the crimes they're breaking out from Democrats? Not one person. It's crazy.
You know, this entire Epstein, this has been, you know, MAHA has been disappointing, but I will say Epstein's been divisional. There's a difference. We bicker about MAHA, but we still all support RFK. We still have hope. We are still trying. We, you know, and I could say this from being in COVID spaces every single day. I'm Stop the Shots community on X. I'm with them every single day, and we haven't lost hope. You know, we will take whatever we can get, and in hope. We're upset, we're frustrated, but you know. But when it comes to this Epstein thing, now this was not the same as saying, "Oh, well, we're not going to take the mRNA off the platform completely." Like this is not the same thing. This is prior to COVID, even. Like this has been going on a long time.
And resonates with one of the most obvious topics of, you know, whether it's sex trafficking, sexual manipulation, pedophilia, like from the conservative side, and rightly so. This has been a huge point of I don't say interest, but you know, politically, that what we're going to stop. And for him to just turn away from that and call it a hoax, there's no one's going to buy that, and they aren't.
Well, it already wasn't looking good with his first term, and I think a lot of the copium is what I'll call it, not the hopium, the copium with the first administration, how we dealt with, you know, all those problems was that, well, it was his first time. He's a businessman, not a politician. So he got a lot of bad people around him in his first term. A lot of those bad people happen to be tied to Epstein, like Bill Barr and people like that were, you know, Alex Acosta.
Right.
These, you know, and so the idea now that he didn't have a good enough idea when it was his administration that the climax of the story occurs, where, you know, Jeffrey Epstein, you know, I guess killed himself in prison. I have a hard time believing that, but you know, that's the narrative. And so to botch it now, like of all things, you know, your fans really are the strongest base I've seen. I think only rival to that could be Obama in my lifetime, was how dedicated of a base that, and I would say Trump has a stronger base than Obama, even because let's be honest, a lot of the Obama people are ideologies, and a lot of them did it really based like on race and to not feel like they were racist. I heard that from many people. Like, I didn't want to be pinned to racist, so of course I voted for him. It's like, well, that's not real loyalty. Like Trump people, they are loyal. Like they're not in this to lose. They are in it because a lot of them really have a kinship and a big admiration for Trump. So it's a different kind of love, but it's very strong similarly. And this whole Epstein thing, you know, rightfully so. And I said this rightfully so. If the truth kills anything, I think it deserves to die. And if that's how it happens with MAGA, then so be it. In my personal opinion, because I think the kids matter more. It's just been a big, terrible letdown. And it's dividing MAGA like I've never seen before.
Yeah. I mean, understandably, you know, this is a jarring moment, you know, and of course it just goes into, it's all fake now, which, you know, my thought on this is like, okay, there's 100 other ways. And like, where's his team? You know, 100 other ways he could have handled this, with a lie included, that could have gone in an entirely different direction. People would have bought almost anything he sold if he made up another excuse that just pushed it out another year, you know, or whatever. But he went all the way to, it's not even real, you know, and these people are like, well, you just told us otherwise. And then just spins into, and previously, before it actually came out from Gabbard, He was already floating, well, they faked Russiagate. So, which I think everybody knows, including most Democrats. And, and so then they roll out this thing about Obama right in the middle of it, which my point quickly is that, okay, well, yes, lock him up. Obama's a criminal. I think he should be in
him
prison.
too. That's what I'm saying. Like, go ahead.
Yeah,
him too.
right.
Him
But
too.
it's very conspicuous to do it now. And secondarily, I don't think he's going to get arrested. And as Spiro says, it's, we've been here before. We've seen this episode before,
And I absolutely love Spiro. He's fantastic.
Me
He's one
too.
of those original OGs. There's one of the very few I've got to talk to him plenty of times in spaces, and meaning to interview with him one of these days. It's refreshing. Like you, Derek, him, like there are very few refreshing people on the board. It's like, okay, people aren't crazy. Thank goodness.
Right.
I absolutely adore him.
Well, and here's another additional point to that same thing is Nick Sorter comes out and says, I don't think people realize just how much danger Gabbard is putting herself in. It's the same thing we see every time. I said, now we're on to this entirely expected part of the partisan performance. How dare you criticize the obvious lies and deflections? Can't you see how much danger they're in? They loudly assume, sure, unless, they're all one team pitting us against ourselves, but that's not possible. I'm just, it's the same point when they go, why wouldn't have Biden released it if Trump was on the list? Because
I love that excuse. That's my favorite one.
Good.
That's my favorite excuse when they say, well, if Trump was on the list and they hated Trump so much, then why wouldn't they go ahead and out the list then? So obviously, like if Biden wanted to, well, has no one considered the fact that maybe more than likely a lot of people close to Biden are also on this list?
Isn't that what conservatives claim anyway?
Why does it have to be like there's nothing,
Right.
It's the copium is like the hope is the future, but the copium is how are you dealing with it? And the cope is so bad on X, especially with this Epstein thing, and people are like, oh well, how much do I have to care about this? So I don't. I'm a pedophile. It's just like, why are you gonna be so extreme? And it's a sense of desperation to maintain the narrative. Really,
it's the point you made earlier. It's they're being extreme because that's what they do. Moments ago, they were being extreme in support of it. Right? Like, oh, anybody who doesn't want this coming out as a pedophile, like Tim Pool did the same thing. Like days before going like, we need to release this because everyone's protecting pedophiles. Then a vote goes through Congress to release the list, which I don't think Democrats wanted or thought would happen. I think they just wanted to make it look like they did. But the point was he then posted, Democrats literally just voted to release pedophile and child porn. I'm like, it's lazy partisan game. He just jumped to the side that's what they're now saying. And I think that's what we keep seeing. It's just why are we even talking about this? Trump came out and said that, right? Well, are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? It's just
insulting.
It was, right? Nobody's buying this. And now, of course, the kind of Clinton overlap, when we go to the tweet that you posted out, here's Tim Pool today. They knew the Russians were not trying to get Trump elected. In fact, it seems the Russians may have wanted Hillary elected. Oh my gosh, it's literally Russiagate reverse now. It's like this all the way back the other way. And then let's play the clip you shared. Then let's talk about thoughts on this, how this connects.
We caught Hillary Clinton. I said, you know what? Let's not go too far here. It's the ex-wife of a president, and I thought it was sort of terrible. And I let her off the hook, and I'm very happy I did.
Wow.
I did. Like that, I went on a rant after that. And I was like, are we talking about the same Hillary Clinton? Are we talking about the 30,000 and illegal servers Hillary, the $65,000 pizza party Podesta Obama Hillary, that Hillary, the kill list, the Clinton kill list Hillary? The same one. You're happy you let her go. You're happy.
And how does the base can make sense of this, right? If we're being told that, and rightly so. Look, there's plenty of evidence around Clinton and some, like even NBC, Chuck Todd did a report back in the day about potential pedophilia allegations in the State Department when she was there, and they got kind of whisked away. But there's very clear evidence. But the point is that people on the right would accuse her of being a pedophile, and here we are covering up another trafficking network. And, it's just like there's more than enough evidence to suggest that he's either somebody's forcing him to hide all of this, or he is implicated. I mean, this seem the most like Occam's razor, the most logical points right now.
Occam's razor, I think a lot of it is that he's, and this is not a very popular opinion. People I know, some people do share it with me, but I do think that Trump has become quite compromised in this second administration. I don't even think it's from within the swamp necessarily. I think a lot of this is a foreign influence.
Yeah.
I think Israel is playing a large part in this. And of course, Israel is the other member of this big, franchise that was going on with Epstein. That's,
right.
Alex Acosta admitted to that he at least was intelligence. You've got the mega study group that ties in with Mossad. So there's more than enough. Like one of the last things he did before he had his original arrest back in like 2006, He flew to Israel right before,
Mhm.
in the midst of trial, flew on to Israel. So it's very clear that he's got some tie, quite clearly to Israel. The amount of money, the people he hung out with were exclusively Jewish billionaires. With the study group is exclusively Jewish billionaires, and
Right.
so to see, and that's where the money came from after his affiliation with Mega is when he really started gaining a lot of traction in terms of property and finances. And so to just ignore that correlation out of fear of being called an anti-Semite, I think is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And I think Trump obviously is just heavily controlled by Israel. It's unfortunate, but I think to deny it at this point is just copium. You're coping a lot.
I agree. I agree. And that, the idea that that becomes something about Jews at large is just ridiculous. It's
It
stupid.
is.
That's not what we're saying. And the obvious reality is about a government and its actions and the
Yeah.
political ideology that drives it. It's frustrating that we even have to go through all that every time, but that speaks to
Every
the larger,
time, right?
right. But it speaks
You
to
have
the
to
larger
take that breath disclaimer to be like, by the way, I'm specifically talking about Benjamin Netanyahu and the
right.
government's actions. You have to do that, and it's the same thing. Like when you criticize Trump, if you ever do go to X Spaces in a Trump room, and you feel like you should say anything that's slightly critical about Trump. There's this thing I've noticed. I noticed myself doing it first, then I noticed other people doing it too, where you make this disclaimer. Look, I voted for Trump. That will
Mhm.
always be the sentence that precedes whatever slight criticism you're able to courage out, but you always like, look, guys, I voted for Trump. But don't you think this is weird? Like I always hear it. And when you think about it, you'll notice it every time. And that to me is a clear red flag and an indicator that there's something terribly wrong here. We have to
Yes.
disclaimer and self-censor. There's a huge problem here.
It's my mind. It's because it's the person doing that who's willing to point out a criticism knows that the gatekeeper, cat turd, Benny Johnson types are going to shout you down the moment that you come in. We go, so you come out like, look, I'm on you. I also think that there's a level, and that's part I would agree with. It's the problem, right? That's why that's happening. I do agree. But I do think there's an element that I always talk about, which is if you want to kind of, coming from an honest place, with a slight maybe white lie, if you want to frame it that way, is come at it like, look, like I said this during COVID. If let's say somebody is just, we know those walls came down. Oh, you disagree with me, then you're the enemy, right? And so you go, maybe you want to show them that masks don't work. And here's a study. You come up to them and go, hey, I'm sure glad we have masks because they're protecting us. But did you see this study? So they go, oh, he's on my side. Right.
Mhm.
And then they what's the study have to say? Doesn't that seem crazy? We're on the same page, right? But this is weird, and then they start to look at it more, it's like maybe there's doing that gives, okay, maybe he is on Trump's side. So I'm more willing to hear the criticism,
Yeah.
it's like, but I agree with you. It's a very clear sign of a problem.
Yeah.
Back to the Epstein part of it is that let's also point out that, right up to Netanyahu, every prime minister, not every one of them, but I think going back at least to Ehud Barak and before, were tied to Epstein. Ehud Barak showed up, I think, 7 times. And there's that one picture of him with his coach covering his face, trying to sneak in to see him while he's under house arrest. It's just clear that there's an interconnection there. But don't assume out there, don't take our word for it. Look at the data points, look at the facts, and recognize that this, as you pointed out, Acosta, who before he went to the first Trump administration, he was asked and he said, they told me to back away because he was, intelligence paraphrasing, and that was enough for them. So they liked that answer. They brought him on the team because he overlooked that concern, and now we see all the connections here. We see all the actions playing out. It's a valid point to be made and ask whether or not there's something happening, especially because the point I was making before. How do you explain all of this? How do you explain? Any politician acting against their interests seems crazy right now, but let alone like against everything that he's built, against what the interest is of the American people, and clearly for the benefit of Israel with anti-Semitism attacks. And, it is kind of alarming, but I'm glad people are starting to call it out at the very least. And I think that is shifting.
Yeah, I think people just need to be very fearless, and be like constant in your belief in the First Amendment and that it is our right until that is stricken. That is something we are entitled. And I truly believe that, like I've mentioned it many times, but John F. Kennedy's speech in 1961 about the importance of media and the importance of telling the truth and transparency. Like if you're going to tout to be the most transparent administration in history, then I'm going to be the most critical and forthcoming citizen in history. Like
Right.
that's the job I'm going to have if you're going to make such a claim. I'm going to hold you to it, and people need to not be afraid of that. The labels are whatever. I'm very fortunate that I'm a woman of color in this country because I feel like I get made a pass on certain things, which is not fair. I'm not saying it's racially or ideologically fair, but I know that they do filter and they do have algorithms that try to, that put people in different labels, like, oh, they're white nationalists or extremists or,
Mhm.
toxic or whatever. And if I can surpass any of those based on the old DEI things that are logged in there, and I can get my voice out there on the truth, then I'm will use that as a means of kind of manipulating the system to get the truth out there better, because I know I'm less censored than somebody like, say, Jake Shields, who there's like the last person they want to hear any criticism from is like a white male right
Right.
now. And so which is just horrific to think that that's just the way it is, that there's such a racial problem. But this whole anti-Semitism thing has got to not be kid gloved. Foreign relations is a real issue. They need to be talked about with
Mhm.
seriousness and not with under the threat that you'll be called some sort of bigot. That's ridiculous. Like, I'm every race pretty much in the world. I couldn't possibly be racist if I wanted to. I'm literally too much of everything. And I have no bias on that. So whenever I've been called it plenty of times, because I did a big thread, and that has been used on Stu Peters' show before. Stu used it lots, and of course, they hate Stu Peters. But it was just me going through the individual states using the Jewish virtual library. I didn't use any
Mhm.
non-Jewish sources and Israeli sources, to just see how much we sent them collectively from the states. For each state, I just wanted to know how much that was, because we sent 3.8 trillion, or not trillion, sorry,
Billion. Yeah.
billion. Whew, that would be a whole nother issue, but it's already bad enough, 3.8 billion federally. But the states, it's so much more. I think with the
Mhm.
states total, with federal, it's closer to 17.5 billion annually. And
Wow.
that, because it made such a big deal, Stu passed it all around and was tagging congressmen and stuff on a show. And so it got a lot of attention from a lot of people in like ADL, very, very upset with me.
Mhm.
And
How
I've been
dare you
called
call it the
anti-Semite.
truth?
I'm just, and I was like, this is not, I'm not even picking like, it's not like you pick like Hitler.com for these sources. This is the Jewish virtual
Right.
library that is, ran by Israelis. So I would assume that you guys would be okay with your sources. But
And
even
it's
then,
also factual information. Like, so,
yeah.
that's the whole
And it's
idea of
not
the facts
damning. It's
aren't
just saying how
racist,
much we
and used
spend.
to say. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it's just how much we spend. It's not even saying anything negative. It's
Right.
not an opinion. It's just like, it's literally a receipt. That's all I'm saying. It's just a receipt for,
Right.
how much that cost looks like. And it's just interesting to see that. And for me, because I found out when I realized my state, Virginia, sends 40 million. And I was like, we have like a lot of problems here. We have a really poor
Mhm.
education system here. Our roads are horrible. We have a lot of military here, a lot of traffic. So we have a lot of bad roads. And it causes a lot of, problems with your cars. Of course, and it costs all the cost, everything just goes up. And so I was like, how come we're spending this outside of our state when we have so many state issues? And then I realized it really was a national issue on a state level. There's
Mhm.
only, I think, 2 states that sent less than a couple 100,000, and that's very few. I think Hawaii was the one who spent the least, about 11 grand. But some of them are up to $2.5 billion, some
It's
states.
just why the
Oregon, yeah.
rationale, why in the world that even makes sense to send? I mean, in any case, like, clearly they feel like they have to. You know what I mean? Like, that's very strange, especially when there's very clear pushback all over the country about this stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna have to make sure I do a point about that, and and highlight your work. So send me that link, and I'll make sure we talk about
I
it.
I absolutely will. It's just like it bothered me that the states that send the most, are typically ones that you would think based on just demographics and people within the state. There is high Jewish populations in the states with the most in general, which makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense to me, because that would be within the interest of, people, possibly back home in different companies, and that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But the problem is those states also happen to be the ones with the highest incidence of homelessness. They're like Oregon, California, New York. And, that money, those billions within the state, that's state money billions, that really right now, those places, I don't know if you've seen downtown Portland recently,
Mhm.
but it is that's where my brother lives. It's last time I visited, it was horrific, and, it's almost unrecognizable. And to think that $2 billion that could have really solved Oregon's homeless problem left to another country in such a
Right.
time of dire need is just, it's not a matter of the religious aspect. I don't care about that at all. It's that we have Americans suffering.
Yeah. Well, I mean, understand the reality, it's not a religious aspect. It's a political aspect.
Yeah.
Zionism. It's not Judaism, right? And the
Yeah.
lies around that are coming out everywhere. But what's frustrating is that, even if we're talking about Israeli Americans, or the weird argument that somehow because you're Jewish, you're connected to Israel, which is not the truth. Ask Orthodox Jews around the world. But the point is that that you're, that money, if you're an Israeli American, Why wouldn't you want that to be helping America with the tax dollars in the United States? Like, you know, and then to have people suffering that don't, like, the argument clearly is that that is more important than your interest in this country. And that is the whole thing we're trying to highlight right now, is that the government is taking actions in the interest of a foreign state over your interest, conservatives, all right, in America. Like, that's the reality. And it's so hard to get people to see that sometimes, but, you know, to kind of wrap up.
It took me a long time. It
Go
took
ahead.
me a while. I was not here. This conversation like would have not been flown with me at all a couple of years ago. But
Mhm.
it was maybe 2 months before October 7th. I had a good friend of mine. She is like dual citizen. She's Israeli and American, and she's Jewish, and she has family there. And she was just told me one day about how her religion was, and she, you know, just thought I'd be interested to find out. And I told her I was absolutely interested. Because I really, you know, I'm raised Christian. I still am a Christian. And so you know, I share the similar beliefs that a lot like the Ted Cruz's of the world. There's a lot of Christians that understood and had no problem with what Ted Cruz said, because that's very common in evangelical
Mhm.
Christianity, that there's this kind of narrative that is not really detailed very well when you're growing up. And I come from a long line of pastors in my family. So
Mhm.
like we built our church in our community back home. So this was, you know, and she told me like, over the course of a couple hours, one lunch, that what she thought and the ideas within her nation and what her people thought and what they thought of my God and our ideals. And I was I was very shocked. She was very
Mhm.
candid with me. Um, it to this day, it gets me tongue tied just thinking about that conversation, because it was so not what I thought I knew,
Yeah.
and hearing it from somebody who I liked, who I consider a friend, who was just casually chatting it with me, it was very alarming. It's very alarming, I think, and for that kind of shock for certain people. It's like the vaccine thing too, when you find out that vaccines
Right.
hurt people, and you're somebody who gave your kid vaccines and stuff, like, you know, you believe this narrative without questioning your whole life, and then when you have that moment where you realize what you knew is not reality,
Mhm.
it's very jarring. It was very jarring for me. I was very distraught. I couldn't believe, I still can't, like, in a lot of ways, and, I think a lot of people are struggling with that, the kind of having to deal with that, and I understand that, because it was a lot for me as a Christian
Mhm.
to understand that, you know, the belief that they made us believe, that we were super aligned on everything. It does not compute in reality, and it's a hard pill to swallow. And I think until that happens, religious, because we are a dominantly Christian. We have we have the most Christians. I think we're competing with China at this point, but in terms of how many, but per capita compared
Mhm.
to any other religion, we're definitely prominent Protestants here. Even our government is well over 60% Protestant of some form and denomination. So, which is not the same kind of case in Israel. Israel does not have multiple religions within their government. We do have 2% Jewish congressmen. We do have like 4% Islam. We got very small percentages of everything, but that's because, you know, we actually do value democracy. And then to find out that Israel's government does not have any non-Jewish people in their government at all. Um, and then they want us to believe the greatest ally in their democracy represents their people, but their entire population isn't represented in their government. Like ours is not well distributed. I'll say that. Like we have far more other ethnicities and religions that should be better represented, but we do have some representation for virtually every type of group in this nation, and that's a blessing of the United States.
Mhm.
But it's also something to consider when we look at this wordage that we mentioned earlier of how they just simply say, "Oh, if you're against Zionism, then you're anti-Semitic," or if you're
Mhm.
against the Bibi's actions, you're anti. If you ask questions, you're anti-Semitic, and it's that language that is put there to dissuade people from getting further into the conversation, to point out the reality. It's like, well, I actually see the separation of church and state. I'm an American. We've made that a part of our culture. Um, and we try to do democracy to represent all people so that we can maintain that, you know, where we have the separation between these personal beliefs and our government. We believe that here, because we support all different ones. And so we can't
Mhm.
support just one. And yet, you know, our greatest ally supports just one. And if we say anything about it or even negatively about them at all, we have laws now that have passed that will punish us. And as when we're the most accepting nation, there is by our government. Our government says like we're the most accepting because we have all sorts of people. We have Buddhists, we have atheists, we have all sorts of representation in this nation. It's not a brand new thing. We've had lots of different colors, races, religions. So for us to be the very transparent and accepting type, and then to be told you're a bigot because you're questioning laws that are going to hurt you. It's this language thing that's really disturbing, and this has been I don't know what Trump is thinking. I really don't. And that's what makes me think he has to be compromised because I just can't see any other rational reason for a lot of these actions, whether it's Palantir and Palantir's work with the military, with the IDF and killing innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Like, how come the children is what's falling through the cracks in all these situations, whether it's DARPA, the control grid, the vaccines, the war mechanism, it's all kind of just comes down to the children. And they're just getting Epstein. I mean, they're getting the real bad end of the stick, but thank goodness they're not transgendering them in schools anymore. That's like the one win, I guess, that we have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely win. I mean, that's that's one of the darkest things that we're seeing happen in this country. But my gut tells me it was kind of a means to an end, and it was not really about the pronouns and the ideology. It's just like, as we talked about USAID, it was just a foot in the door for regime change. And whatever the narrative is that day, whatever the narrative du jour is that can be used, that'll be used. And that's why I often point out that even right now, the current Trump administration is still funding in ways they don't want to make highlighted circumcision in Africa to fight off AIDS in multiple places in Africa, South Africa, one in Mali. And when they made this big stink about how crazy that was from before, I'm like, well, here's two examples of them currently funding that, or climate change related aspects. Now, I don't think it's because they care about those things. I think it's because wherever those locations are, that still serves the purpose. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's clear, but there are plenty of people that absorb this ideology and dangerously still think it matters. But the point is the real big picture, and, it's hard to look at all that and not see that there's a big problem happening, and that they're lying to us about the way it goes. There are plenty of people that would disagree about like their government and what they're doing there, but the facts speak for themselves and what's actually happening. And ask Ethiopian Jews how they're treated inside of Israel.
I read about that.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And there's so many examples of this stuff. Again, I think people are finally starting to ask these questions. And I'll end with the point of, that I agree with you in regard to whatever it is, something's driving these actions that's not in American interest. And so the idea that he's floated 6 different times now that American citizens could be next. 2 of those points, he mentioned people born here. So not just naturalized U.S. citizens, as much as that's just as concerning. And so the problem is that I think there's something that's being driven, either the collapse of this country or against American interests. And I just think it's worth our time to call these things out. And like you're pointing out, with everything you do is to not let it be, we'll blind ourselves to the side that doesn't help our current agenda. We just have to start being honest about these things, So any final comments on that, and just any, wrap up points you want to make?
Yeah, like I just want to put like some if people are looking for things to look into, like at prediction wise kind of here. I feel like what's going on with space and the space efforts right now, I think is really important for people to start paying attention a little more to what's going on with SpaceX and the United States Space Force. We don't hear a lot about them. They don't make a lot of stink about it unless it's a launch. Right. But there's been a lot. I mean, the number of launches alone have increased almost 60-70% every year since COVID started. Since we started launching again on American soil. But there's definitely a lot in terms of DARPA's aspect for what they're trying to do with a lot of these satellites. They're working on a lot of these satellite technologies with people like Palantir and with, Starlink. And I think that, that's where a lot of the money is going, even though they just did a 24.5% decrease in the funding for NASA. There are also these other weird kind of things going on where you've got Sean Duffy now, director for NASA / Department of Transportation, as I mentioned earlier. There's just a lot of happening. And, personally, if you ever get the chance to look into it, look into May 30th, 2020. I know it's a long time ago, started the pandemic era, but there was a launch that day called the Demo 2 launch that Trump attended during the highest threat level a president has received since 9/11. And he dismissed his security staff to attend that launch, which was just a restock. And I just urge people to go look at that instance. It's very very unique, and then something is there with the space. Something's important with Elon too. The whole Doge, something there that I think people need to look at and pay attention to.
I'm glad, and just a thought to end on for people to look into. I really agree with you. I've made this point about, how do we ever confirm what the hell's going on in outer space? It's like the Wild West right now, because if we believe what they claim, they have the ability to go and build bases and fly around, so what is going on? And what are other countries doing similar things we're not hearing about? Are they competing? How is that not possible? How is it? It seems likely that there's some kind of engagement going on that we're unaware of, or what they're doing from like what I played this little graphic here for the podcast to show in the last, since
Is it the
2019.
Neuralink?
Yeah, that's satellites.
Not Neuralink, sorry, Starlinks.
Yeah, well, it's both really. Oh yeah, you said Neuralink. Sorry, yes, SpaceX or Starlink. The satellite point is that image makes me feel claustrophobic. I'm like, oh my God, that scares me. But it's like we're being, there's so much that could lead from that. And so I agree with you. We should look into this, what's going on, and and how that can be used within this country for surveillance or any number of other things. But yeah, there's so much going on that I think we're in ways, like even with stories that are valid and important, like an Epstein story, are still almost in their own right being used to keep us from looking at other things. There's so many ways to look at all this. And I will again shout out your work, and hope people will continue to look at your investigations and what you're talking about on your other platforms on Twitter and everything else. And thank you for coming and joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy the conversation. It was a little all over the place, but like my mind works that way, so I'm more than happy to do it.
That's my favorite. I mean, I think it's just, rapid fire kind of conversation about different things going on because, we get a little limited time, and I think it's important to see people, kind of contextualize the larger opinion about things. And, so thank you again for being here. And anything else you want to shout out before you wrap today? Any upcoming events or anything?
No, I just want to say, thank you. Of course, I absolutely should make time to do more of these with you. I do enjoy them very much. And there's so many, like you said, there's so many stories to talk about, and it's never ending. I don't know. I'm beginning to think it's all by design to have so many massive. When has ever life been this interesting? There's just so much. So I try to look at everything, but I know I miss a lot. But definitely love talking it over with you.
Thank you, and I look forward to the next one. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported, for his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I am sorry to say is coming.